Okay, so picking up right where we left off, now that we can assemble a basic sandwich, the bun and the burger, now we need to be able to click on that and hand it to the customer. Incidentally, I also imported the image of the customer as well as the money they'll leave on the counter when they receive their order. So that means that we need to add functionality to the bun to be moved. There's no script attached to it currently, so we need to add a new script. So right click, create C#, and we'll call this move sandwich. So we'll click on the burger top, we'll drag and drop move sandwich, and now it has a script. So let's go ahead and open that up. Zoom in a little bit. And in a text file, I have the code that I'm about to use, so I'll copy and paste it, but I'll explain everything. So, what do we have here? We have a vector2, which means it stores x and y coordinates for the variable mouse component. What we're saying is update this variable with the mouse position x and mouse position y, so the x and y of the mouse. So take these coordinates, dump it into here. Alright. Now you take that same variable and you're filtering it through camera.main.screen to world point, and you're dumping it into this variable, which is another vector2. So what you're doing is you're really kind of reading this right to left. You're grabbing these variables, these coordinates, and dropping them into this variable. So these coordinates into this variable. You take that variable and you filter it through here. Why? Because you're using two different systems. Unity uses what it's called Unity units, and that is like when you see me typing in the XY coordinate 1, 2, 3. That's very different than the actual mouse coordinates. So what you're doing is first you're grabbing the mouse coordinates, filtering it through here so it's being turned into the equivalent Unity units, and now you're taking that variable and you're saying, okay, apply it to whatever object the script is attached to, because transform.position equals, and then you set a value that changes the position of the object the script is attached to. So again, you're kind of reading this right to left. You're grabbing coordinates, dropping them to the variable, taking that variable, filtering it, taking that variable, and applying it. Now, we don't want that to always happen because we put it in the update section, but we don't want it to always happen. We only want this to happen once it's been clicked on with the mouse. So we're going to come back to this in a minute. So we want this to be clickable. So void on mouse down. This is a predefined routine, so it's case sensitive. You've got to have capital OMD or else it won't work. Now, on mouse down, we need to have some kind of trigger so as that we acknowledge that the mouse is now moving, the sandwich is now moving in time with the mouse, or to be more specific, just the bun is at the moment. So let's create a new variable. So public, let's use a string. So public string and mouse controlled, we'll call it, is equal to no. So on mouse down checks for a left click of the mouse on the object that the script is attached to. Again, that's the bun. So we're going to take mouse controlled and change it to yes. And now this all comes together if mouse controlled equals, I said yes and no, but it's y and n, so just make sure to have it match. You can do N or you could do no, as long as you're checking for the right values. So if mouse control is equal to Y, then this should be updating the position. Now this might not work because there is an issue with overlapping objects that all have collider boxes. So we'll see if this works. So there's the bun. Technically don't want to move it yet because there's no hamburger in it, but we're just testing the functionality. And actually it's working just fine, so we might not have any issue with the collider boxes that I thought we would. Or maybe they fixed that in Unity 5 because I seem to remember having that problem in Unity 4. So, we're now moving the bun, that easily. But we need to know to move everything else as well. So, that means everything else needs to move in time with this. There's a couple ways to go about this. One of the ways that I thought about and then discarded is if an object is a child to a parent, if you move that parent, the child moves with it. So if we could make, say, the bottom of the bun be a child to the top of the bun, then as you move the top of the bottom of the bun would move as well without any additional coding, just the one line that says, okay, the top of the bun is the parent. I can't make it work, unfortunately. So if that's something you want to explore on your own, that's fine. But for some reason, just couldn't quite get it to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of fudge it. We're going to give every object a variable, and that variable is going to say what slot it is in, and then have it move also with the mouse. So getting the parent to work would probably be the better solution, but having said that, ultimately we really need to track what slot an object is in, and at that point it really isn't. So the bun may be put in an empty slot, but the bun isn't really aware, so to speak, of where it is. So we really have to add this type of variable anyways. So what we want to do is we need to acknowledge what slot an object is in. So for move sandwich, which is attached currently to the top of the bun, so public occupied slot, oops, sorry, didn't say what kind of variable it is, public int occupied slot equals 1. Equals 0. We want it to be set to nothing to begin with. There is no 0 slot. We already said that this is S1, S2, and S3. So, we've created a new variable to track what slot the bun is in, the top of the bun is in. So that means we now need to populate that with something. So, when you click on the bin, okay, so bin controls when you click on the bins down here. That's when the open slot is being looked for, and that determines what slot the bun goes into. So right here, if you're clicking on the object whose name is bun bin, this is where it determines which slot it's going into. So slot 1, slot 2, slot 3. So that we need to store. So let's go back into our gameplay script, since we're going to make a static variable. And we'll call this public static selected slot. We'll set it to 0. Oops, sorry, I'm missing all kinds of things. Int selected slot. And now what we do is we want to assign a value to that when you click on the bin. So since this is slot 1, then gameplay dot selected slot should therefore be set to 1. Sorry, having right-click troubles this morning. So here, since it's slot 2 you're checking, selected slot should be 2, and here it should be 3. So let's save that, make sure this was saved. Yes, it was. Okay, so now what we want is we want this value to receive this value. So when the object gets instantiated, we'll take occupied slot and we'll set it equal to gameplay dot selected slot. So whatever the current selected slot is should be set to the value of the patty, excuse me, not the patty, the bun that you just instantiated. So to make sure this is working, debug.log and let's type occupied slot. So we're going to run this, and then when the bun gets instantiated, it should state what slot it's in. So 1, 2, 3. Might be hard to read on the screen, but it did indeed increase. So excellent, that is working. We are now tracking what slot the bun is in. So now what we need to do is basically just rinse and repeat. We need the hamburger to acknowledge that as well. So cook food is attached to the hamburger. So when it gets placed on the cutting board, it also needs that value to accept that selected slot value. So we'll also create public int occupied slot. Now, it's okay that I used the same variable name because this is not a static variable. It's unique to each and every object that this script is attached to. So if this script is attached to 20 different hamburgers, then there's 20 different separate occupied slots. So it's okay to use the same variable, and the reason why I'm recommending it in this case is because that way, regardless of what script you're in, you know what this does. So now we need the occupied slot to take the value of selected slot, which is assigned when you click on the bin. So what we want, actually, that's not quite right actually, because this is when you click on the bin, and that's not, so I might have actually added a third hamburger, but the third bun, but the first one might still be empty, so I take that back. We don't want selected slot. We need to track what the open slot is. The good news is, though, we don't need a global variable for that, because so cook food is attached to the hamburger. The hamburger gets instantiated, but then you have the ability to click on the hamburger. So right there and then it's looking to see which slot is empty. So just like with the cutting board, it's like, okay, slot 1, slot 2, slot 3, we could just set the value right here. So occupied slot equals 1, occupied slot equals 2, occupied slot equals 3. Now, this is when the variables start to make a difference. So what we said at the beginning was that when you click on the bun, you can then move the bun with the mouse. We want everything else to do this as well. So that means we're going to have to really rinse and repeat this. So, for the sandwich, in the update section, we're going to need its position updated, and its position should be based on its position should be based on the bun, which is based on the mouse. So what we need to do is we want to say if the occupied slot, okay, so each bun is tracking what slot it's in. So if you're moving this sandwich, then you want the corresponding ingredients to move as well. So that means we need one more global variable, and that is when we click on the actual sandwich, we need to capture which one we're clicking. So we'll create one more static variable here. So public static int, and we'll call this selected sandwich to differentiate it from the selected slot. So what we do is on mouse down, okay, this is in move sandwich. So we want to track which sandwich we're moving. Well, we know that it occupies, or it's this one. So what we want to do is gameplay dot selected sandwich is equal to occupied slot. So whatever slot this bun is in, we want to drop it into this variable, which now lets this, and since this is a global variable, the hamburger patty can now look to see if its slot matches the slot of the hamburger. So we go to cook food. We're going to take this, but we're going to make one change. This if is going to change. So we want, in the update section of cook food, we want the position of the patty to move, but only if its occupied slot is equal to gameplay dot selected sandwich. That should do it. We want it to be slightly lower though. So let's do transform dot position. Rather than using object position in its whole, we'll break it out slightly. So new vector 2, and it will be object position dot x. That's fine, but we want it to be slightly lower than the screen so it's not being covered up by the bun. So object position dot y minus 0.2f. And unless I missed something, that should do it. So my apologies, that's kind of circuitous, tracking all these slot positions, but ultimately you really kind of have to know where it is. So we've created a variable to track which slot each object is in. And now we run this. We click on the bun, we click on the hamburger. Okay, so it's already moving, so that's a mistake. And the reason for it is because they're set to 0 to begin with. So I set everything to 0, so that was just an oversight. So let's default this to 100, just so it's not the same. So let's try this again. So we'll click on the bun, we click, nope, that still didn't do it. Okay, so I'm pretty sure I know what's going on. There's an issue where for some reason when you change the value in a script, it does not actually change the value of the object. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the burger patty. See how it says occupied slot 0? Even though I changed it to 100, it didn't fix it. So my initial assertion was correct, that indeed that was the problem. But for whatever reason, like I said, Unity has this issue where even though you change the value in a script, it gets overridden for some reason. So if you find that happening, you can do a couple of things. You can either manually change it on the object itself, or you can delete the variable, save it, that wipes out the variable, and then recreate it with the proper value. So let's take it from there. There we go. Perfect. So that's what was doing it. So my initial assertion was correct that they were both set to 0. And now we've got it. Excellent. So that should do it. So I think I'm going to end the video here because of that little glitch, but we'll see how long this is.